Specialist pollinators have very strict dietary requirements.
Table for three?
They, or often their larvae, can only eat from one species of plant, known as their host plant.
What are you guys getting?
I feel like I always get the same thing.
Or sometimes from just a few closely related host plants.
Hey guys, I'll be out in a minute. Let's see here.
The very existence of these specialist bees, butterflies, moths, and other insects depends on the preservation of their host plants. And as gardeners, we can directly support natural conservation of these important relationships.
Yeah, I forgot my glasses.
Oh, here.
Did you know that monarchs can successfully reproduce with a few plants other than milkweed?
Ooh, you know what I might try?
We'll come back to that one. One plant that shows exactly why it's so important for us to understand these specialist relationships is lupin, or lupine. Planting the wrong one in our gardens can be devastating for the federally endangered Carner blue butterfly. This butterfly is a specialist on an eastern species called sundial lupin, Lupinus perennis. This plant is the only larval host for the Carner blue butterfly. But sadly, a different lupin species, western lupin, Lupinus polyphyllus, is being packaged with wildflower seed mixes and propagated all across North America with devastating effects. In seed mixes, it's often called wild lupin and even incorrectly labeled as Lupinus perennis. The Lupinus perennis seeds should be all white, while the Lupinus polyphyllus seeds are nearly black. The western lupin is not a larval host for the endangered Carner blue, and worse, its foliage is actually poisonous to their larvae. When Carner blues lay their eggs on the western lupin, sadly those babies will not survive.
Oh man, that's a doozy.
And as if things weren't already bad enough, the western species readily hybridizes with the eastern native, and their offspring are also poisonous. You'll commonly see specialist insects referred to as picky eaters, but I wouldn't call it picky so much as just not wanting to die. I kept seeing this little blip of pale blue making its way around my garden. I thought it might be a Carner blue, but after studying my photos, I think it's the eastern-tailed blue. But I've got some sundial lupin started this year, so I'll be keeping an eye out. If you're growing lupin in your garden, I strongly encourage you to identify what species you have, especially if you live in this region. Removing non-native lupin and planting the native species is an amazing way to show support for our endangered Carner blue. All right, pop quiz. Is this nature lover snuggled up in western lupin or sundial lupin? It's hard to tell, but the large leaves and the tall blooms give it away as western lupin. Many specialists are rare, and one rare bee with an amazing name is the
Spotted horsemint fairy bee? Your table's ready.
spotted horsemint fairy bee, Perdita gerardi. This bee is monolectic, meaning that it can only eat from one species of plant, and it's a gorgeous plant, spotted bee balm, Monarda punctata, also sometimes called horsemint, hence the bee's delightful name. This bee and flower have such an intimate relationship that the bee is even colored like the flower so it can camouflage while it snacks. A second specialist bee that needs this same Monarda punctata is Protandrina abdominalis. This bee has not been seen in my home state of Maryland for over 100 years. That feels like an invitation to plant spotted bee balm, and as this article puts it, start checking it out for little red bee butts. The Monarda genus supports yet a third specialist bee, Duphoria monardae, which is considered imperiled or critically imperiled over much of its range. This one is an oligolectic bee, which means it can eat from several species of flowering plants, but all within a single family or genus. For Duphoria monardae, that's the Monarda genus, as the bee's name suggests. And many of you may already be familiar with the federally endangered rusty-patched bumblebee, Bombus affinis. Rather than specialists, these bees are actually generalists, or polylectic, meaning that they can eat from lots of unrelated plant genera. The Xerces Society has documented rusty-patched bumblebee visits to at least 138 different genera, but interestingly, about 1/5 of those visitations were to bee balm. I recently thought I spotted a rusty-patched bumblebee on my echinacea, and I was crazy excited. After some research, I realized it was a brown-belted bumblebee. So far, 0 for 2 on endangered species, but the rusty-patched has been spotted in Maryland, so I'm going to keep planting things they love and keep hunting for them in hopes they'll find my garden. So anyway, that's a lot of endangered species that need Monarda.
Yes, they get it. Bee wants you to plant some bee balm. Oh, yes, I do.
Okay, moving on. Next is the rose mallow bee, Tylothrix bombiformis, which is a hibiscus specialist. It's considered vulnerable in Indiana and Connecticut and imperiled in New York. So especially in these states, it's important to start planting their hosts, our native hibiscus. These hibiscus generally prefer moist to wet sites, and it's no coincidence that the rose mallow bee likes to nest in hard-packed soil in close proximity to water. And the female bees can actually walk on water. They'll tread on the surface to collect water that they then use to moisten the soil and help them to excavate their burrows, leaving a kind of mud chimney around the nest entrance. About 70% of bees nest underground, and they need direct access to bare earth, so leaving some bare soil in our gardens is really important if we want to host specialist bees. A yummy specialist host is the blueberry.
Open. Okay. Let's take a look.
I planted some this spring and have really enjoyed watching them.
That one. Ooh.
Our kids loved them, and so do the bees. Look at this bee flying around with its tongue out. I've watched that more times than I'm willing to admit. Blueberries host a number of specialists, but one example, the southeastern blueberry bee, Habropoda laboriosa, is native to the eastern U.S., and they're allegolectic, specializing on southern rabbit-eye blueberries, and a second species called yellow jessamine, Gelsemium sempervirens. I'm really testing my Latin skills here. I definitely practice, but this is still tricky. Not just anyone can pollinate a blueberry. Blueberry flowers have a sort of vase shape that requires a longer face to reach the nectar inside. And blueberries have heavy, sticky pollen that's hard to extract. So these southeastern blueberry bees will actually latch onto the anthers and vibrate their wings and thoracic muscles at frequencies of about 100 to 500 hertz. This vibrates the pollen right off the anthers, and it sticks to our hardworking bee. Buzz pollination was only discovered within the past 100 years, but it's necessary for many of our food crops and is not something honeybees can do. Many specialists have short lives and emerge precisely at the time their host's flowers will be in bloom. Our southeastern blueberry bees will emerge for only a few weeks in late February, and they'll stay active through April, exactly when the blueberries are in flower. These bees survive the cooler late winter temperatures by vibrating those same thoracic muscles that they use for pollination, but now for warmth. That's not a coincidence. The same muscles these bees use to keep warm while the blueberries are in bloom are also necessary to pollinate the flowers. These intricate relationships are very common in our ecosystems. Some species related to the blueberries are also very important, including deerberry, Vaccinium staminaeum, and cranberry, Vaccinium macrocarpon. These are both in the same genus as blueberry and are also hosts to rare bees. One of these bees is a monolectic specialist, meaning deerberry is its only food source.
Can you find a blue one up here?
A blue one.
Yes.
We don't fully understand what makes one specific pollen digestible for specialist bee larvae, but others not. Initially, it was thought to be related only to the biochemical properties of different pollen. But some interesting research has shown a link between the health of bee larvae and the naturally occurring microbiota present in their host pollen. Just like humans, the gut microbiome of bees provides a critical function in supporting nutrition and immune health. E.O. Wilson talked about the little things that run the world, and he was not kidding.
Do you guys mind if I just...
In this case, it's the little things inside the little things that are running the world. If you want a shot at seeing this beautiful butterfly, try planting yellow passionflower. It's a larval host for several butterflies, including this zebra longwing. And it's the only known pollen source that's used by a specialist bee, Anthomergus passiflora, a bee which is the only member of its genus. This bee is rare, and yellow passionflower has also become rare toward the northern extent of its range. In Pennsylvania, it's considered an endangered species, so in these regions it's definitely a valuable addition to the garden. The spring beauty minor bee, Andrena erigine, is considered vulnerable or imperiled over parts of its range, and its larvae require the pink pollen of spring beauty flowers in the Claytonia genus. Pink pollen! Look at this mama bee covered in pink pollen. It's worth planting spring beauty just to see that. This bee will also visit the flowers of its namesake, Eriginea bulbosa, for nectar. You might already be hosting one specialist bee without even trying. Andrena violae is a bee that specializes on common violets, but sadly is vulnerable over much of its range and critically imperiled in Vermont. So let's leave more of our wild violets to grow around our gardens and lawns. We're lucky to have these cheery, vigorous little host plants. And Prairie Moon Nursery also sells a number of very interesting species if you're looking to add in some diversity. Violets are also host to fritillary butterflies. A female fritillary will lay her eggs near wild violets late in the summer. And instead of feeding after they hatch, they'll go dormant and they'll stay dormant through to the next spring. In spring, they'll reemerge to feed just as the violets are beginning to grow fresh foliage. And violets are also one of several hosts for the giant leopard moth. This gorgeous girl has sadly passed on. They don't live very long in the adult stage. So short that they don't even bother to eat, just to mate. And she can lay her eggs on a variety of host plants, including violets, cherries, maples, and willows. The violet miner bee is in the genus Andrena, and other mining bees also demonstrate a wide variety of pollen specialization. To the east, Andrena rudbeckiae is an allegalactic bee that will collect pollen from both black-eyed Susans and gray-headed coneflowers. And more towards central North America, Andrena helianthiformis specializes on echinacea and is mostly spotted in areas where older remnant populations of coneflowers still exist. Protecting our remnant prairies is vital to habitat conservation in North America, as they host a massive amount of biodiversity. Look to see what ecosystems near you are threatened and endangered. As gardeners, we are uniquely posed to learn about these ecosystems, to advocate for them, and to integrate them back into our gardens.
Our food is taking forever.
Competing for bee with the coolest name is the denticulate longhorned bee, Melisodes denticulata. This bee is a pollen specialist of ironweeds and is quite a looker with those impressive antennae. These bees are considered vulnerable over parts of their range, and while they feed primarily on ironweed species, they have been seen to visit other aster species with early August blooms for nectar, like Joe Pye weeds. So consider planting ironweed and Joe Pye weed as companion plants. Mistflower is a beauty that blooms late summer into the fall and can often bloom up until the first frost. It makes fuzzy purplish blue flowers that are an important late-season nectar source for butterflies, bees, and moths. It can spread with some vigor, so it's great to fill in a larger space, but it's easy to pull if you do want to control its sprawl. And it's worth adding to your garden, since it's a host to 21 species of butterflies and moths, including the lined ruby tiger moth. And of those 21 species, 13 are specialist moths, including the eastern tail blue we saw earlier, the hackberry emperor, and the American snout. Yucca moths and yucca plants have what's called a reciprocal obligate relationship. They need each other, mutually and exclusively. The yucca cannot make seeds without the yucca moth, and the yucca moth larvae only survive if they can eat the developing yucca seeds. If you plant a moth-pollinated species like yucca, it's crucial to place it where it will be sheltered from light at night. Artificial lights disorient moths, making it difficult for them to find mates, to escape predators, and to pollinate plants. One study showed nocturnal visits were reduced by over 60% when there was exposure to artificial night lights. So sheltering your garden from light pollution is incredibly important for nocturnal insects and pollinators. Now for the famous but sadly struggling monarchs. Milkweeds are an incredibly important host plant for monarch butterflies, whose caterpillars are adapted to eat the leaves. But did you know that monarchs can sometimes also successfully reproduce using a few other closely related genera? Monarch caterpillars have been shown to consume some species of native honeyvine, like Cynantium laeve, as well as native milk vines. Consider planting these alongside your milkweed, but definitely avoid non-native species. Monarchs may lay eggs on them, but their caterpillars won't feed. So for this, in all of these host plants, verify that they're native to your region in order to truly support your local insects. Two researchers, Jared Fowler and Sam Droge, have put together some amazing resources on specialist bees for 3 different regions of North America. They provide lots of incredible information, and at the end of each page is a very helpful summary of plant genera that are used by many specialists. These are some powerhouse plants we can target to greatly increase the positive impact for pollinators. It's so important to plant native species that are native within your local ecoregion, and to see why that's especially crucial for monarchs, watch this video next.
I think someone at this table might be a nerd. I don't think it's me.
I think it's me.